My wife didn't just try to take my money. She paid a psychiatrist to make my grief sound like madness. I walked into divorce court alone, with no lawyer, no family behind me, and a room full of people waiting for me to break. Her lover smirked and said he already lost the moment he walked in. But inside my old briefcase was page 17, one hidden trust, and a recording she never thought I'd dare to play. I didn't learn the truth all at once. I learned it through frozen accounts, unanswered family texts, and a medical file twisted into a weapon. When someone has money, they don't always have to shout. Sometimes they just rewrite your story before you enter the room. Before we get into what happened, tell me where you're listening from. And have you ever had to prove you weren't the crazy one? Because by the time that recording filled the courtroom, nobody was laughing anymore. The floor outside courtroom 5E still had a wet shine from the shoes coming in off the Atlanta rain. It was late fall, one of those gray mornings where the whole city looked like it had not fully woken up yet. The courthouse smelled like coffee, old paper, and wood polish, the kind of smell that makes every mistake in your life feel official. My name is Callan Voss. I was 39 years old, the youngest son in my family, and that morning I was walking into my own divorce hearing without a lawyer, not because I wanted to, not because I thought I was smarter than everybody else, because the woman sitting on the other side of that door had made sure I could not afford one. I wore a charcoal suit that used to fit better. The shoulders hung a little loose, and the cuffs had been pressed so many times they had started to shine. In my left hand, I carried my father's old leather briefcase. In my right, I held a blue pen that had belonged to my mother. The cap had a small crack in it, and my thumb kept finding that crack like it was a place to hold on. Inside the briefcase were a yellow legal pad, a few folders, printed emails, one settlement page, and a truth Arden Vale had not planned on hearing out loud. I pushed the door open. The room divided itself before anyone said a word. On one side sat Arden, my wife, calm as a portrait, expensive navy dress, smooth hair, no wasted movement. She did not look nervous. She looked prepared. Beside her was Bram Calder, the kind of divorce attorney people hire when they want the other side to leave with less than money. His table was covered in binders, color tabs, laptops, and glass cups beside a pitcher of water. Merrick Shaw sat close enough to Arden to make his presence clear, though he had no business being at counsel table, her consultant, her lover, her replacement for me, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than my car payment. My table had a plastic cup of water, my legal pad, and that old briefcase. Behind me, the family seats were empty. I had saved 3 seats in my head, one for Rulon, one for Selah, one for anybody willing to believe I was still worth hearing. The clerk called the case. Judge Orrin Pike came in with the tired face of a man who had watched too many people call cruelty closure. Everyone stood. Chairs scraped. Papers shifted. Bram rose first. Bram Calder for Miss Arden Vale, Your Honor. Judge Pike looked at me. I stood. My chair made a sound that seemed too loud. Callan Voss, Your Honor. I'm representing myself. A little movement passed through the room. A few faces turned. Some looked sorry for me. Some looked entertained. I felt the old urge to explain, to say I had tried, to say 3 law firms had turned me away, to say Arden had frozen the money before I could even get a retainer together, but I kept my mouth shut. I knew how it looked. That was the point. Arden had made sure of it. Then she laughed. It was not loud. It did not need to be. It was small, clean, and sharp enough to travel. A couple people in the gallery gave quiet little laughs with her, then looked down when the judge's eyes moved toward them. Merrick leaned back like he had been waiting for his cue. "This loser is representing himself?" he said, just loud enough for the room to hear. "That's pathetic." Then he smirked. He already lost the moment he walked in. Heat rose up my neck. My first instinct was to turn toward him. My second instinct was older, better trained. I looked down instead. My thumb pressed the crack in my mother's blue pen. I set it on the legal pad slowly, so no one would see my hand move. Judge Pike's voice cut through the room. "That will be enough." But it was not enough. Not really. Because once a room agrees to laugh at you, the sound does not end when the judge tells it to. Judge Pike leaned forward. "Mr. Voss, you understand that if you proceed without counsel, you will be held to the same standard as an attorney. This matter involves corporate assets, financial disclosures, psychological evidence, and potentially complex marital property issues. Do you understand that? Yes, Your Honor. Bram stood again, smooth as fresh paint. Your Honor, Miss Vale has made every effort to resolve this privately and compassionately. She is concerned about Mr. Voss's recent instability and his refusal to accept a generous settlement. Compassion. That was the word people used when they wanted cruelty to sound notarized. Arden lowered her eyes like the whole thing pained her. Merrick looked amused again. I glanced back once more at the empty seats. The laughter hurt, but those seats hurt in a quieter way. The night before, I had sent one message to my family group chat. I need someone there tomorrow. No answer. Being the youngest son teaches a man strange math. Other people's emergencies become your duty. Your own emergency becomes an inconvenience. So, I sat down. Across the aisle, Arden's table looked like power. Mine looked like a man who had already run out of options. But Merrick was looking at my suit, my empty table, and my old briefcase. He had no idea there was a voice inside that briefcase that would make him stop smiling. Arden had spent months making sure I looked like a man with no way to fight back. She had made one mistake. Quiet people keep records. They laughed because I had no lawyer, but they did not know Arden had spent 3 weeks making sure I could not afford one. 3 weeks before that courtroom laughed at me. I was sitting at the kitchen table in my temporary apartment, staring at the third email that said the same thing in a different font. Without a retainer, no lawyer would stand beside me. The apartment was not much. 1 bedroom, a small kitchen, a window facing a parking lot, and a table too narrow for the papers I had spread across it. I had bank statements on one chair, court filings beside the sink, and a half-cold cup of coffee sitting on top of a stack of envelopes I had already opened twice. Outside, traffic from I-75 moved like low thunder. I read the email again, even though I knew every line. Mr. Voss, after reviewing the preliminary materials, our office is unable to proceed without a retainer. Professional, polite, final. The first firm had sounded sympathetic on the phone. The receptionist told me, "I'm sorry you're going through this, sir," in that careful way people use when they know sorry will not change the price. The second firm sent a retainer agreement I could not touch. The third agreed to a short consultation, then backed away after seeing the words Arden's side had started using in the filings. Financial paranoia, impaired judgment, fixation on non-existent assets. Those words did not accuse me of being broke. They did something cleaner. They made me look unsafe. Bram Calder, Arden's attorney, had filed a motion to secure the marital accounts. On paper, it sounded reasonable, protective, temporary, necessary. That was how people like Bram wrote things. He could put a lock on your life and make it sound like housekeeping. The joint checking account was frozen. The savings account was restricted. The card I had used for groceries, gas, and household bills was canceled. A small emergency fund I thought still existed had been moved under some corporate protection explanation I could barely get anyone to explain. Then Arden sent me an email. "I hope this time gives you space to seek stability and get the help you need." She had cut off my access, then wrote to me like she was handing me a blanket. That afternoon, I drove to a FedEx office near Midtown to print the filings. I had highlighted the important parts on my laptop and wanted color copies so the judge could follow the timeline. The clerk ran my card. The machine beeped once, declined. He looked away, trying to be kind. "Do you want to try another card?" I felt my face warm, not from shame exactly, from the knowledge that Arden had built that moment too. "Black and white is fine," I said. It was not fine. I paid with the cash in my wallet and printed only what I absolutely needed. When the clerk handed me the receipt, I folded it once and put it in my pocket. By then, I had learned not to throw anything away. Back at the apartment, I laid the 3 law firm emails side by side. I wrote the date, time, firm name, and requested retainer beside each one. My mother's old blue pen skipped on the first word, then wrote clean. I labeled a folder access cut off. I was not being rejected because I had no case. I was being rejected because truth had a cover charge in rooms like that. As I sorted the filings, one sentence in Bram's motion stopped me. Respondent anticipates statements from family members concerning petitioner's recent instability. I read it twice. Family members. At that point, I did not know whose names would end up under those statements. I only knew Arden had started reaching into places money should never reach. I sat there until after midnight, surrounded by paper, trying to understand how fast a life could shrink. A month earlier, I had a home, accounts, a shared history, and at least the illusion that people would ask questions before judging me. Now I had folders, receipts, and a plastic grocery bag full of documents I could not afford to print properly. Then my phone lit up. Rulon, my older brother. Don't make this uglier than it has to be. No. Did you find a lawyer? No. Are you holding up? Before I could answer, Sayla texted too. Arden has helped this family more than you want to admit. Please think about that. I looked at those messages for a long time. The money was gone. The lawyers were out of reach. And now, the people I had hoped would stand behind me were already asking me to sit down quietly. That was when I understood. Arden had not only closed accounts, she was closing doors. When the money was gone and the lawyers were out of reach, I looked for my family, and that was when I learned how expensive their silence had become. Rulon called it keeping the peace. In the Voss family, that had always meant the youngest son gave way first. I sat at that little kitchen table with my phone in my hand, Rulon's message still open and Sayla's sitting right under it. Neither one asked how I was supposed to face Arden without counsel. Neither asked what had happened to the accounts. They did not ask if I had eaten, slept, or found anybody willing to represent me. They just wanted me to stop pushing. Rulon was the oldest. He had that older brother voice that could make a suggestion sound like a command. Sayla was the middle child, softer on the surface, but she knew how to wrap guilt in concern. The next morning, Rulon called while I was sorting bank notices. "Callan, listen to me," he said. "Don't make this uglier than it has to be. Arden's done a lot for this family. Take the settlement and start over." I stared at the folder in front of me. Access cut off. My own handwriting looked steadier than I felt. "Did she ask you to call me?" I said. He paused half a second too long. "I'm calling because I care about you." That was a good line. People use it when they want to move past the question. Later, Sayla texted. "Arden helped Bria when no one else could. Please don't forget that." I did not forget. Arden's foundation had helped with Bria's tuition. Arden had also helped Rulon refinance his mortgage when he was close to losing the house. I understood fear. I understood debt. I understood parents wanting their children to be okay. But they were not asking me to forgive Arden. They were asking me to make sure her help did not become uncomfortable for them. That hurt because it was familiar. When my mother, Lorna, got sick, I was the one who moved appointments around. I picked up prescriptions after work, changed bulbs in her hallway, fixed the sticking back door, sat beside her when the house got too quiet. Rulon would say he was slammed. Sayla would say hospitals made her anxious. I told myself, families survive because somebody bends. So I bent. I drove Bria to school when Sayla had double shifts. I patched Rulon's roof after a summer storm. I paid little bills nobody remembered because small bills do not become family stories. They just disappear into the hands of whoever handles them. My silence had started as love. Somewhere along the way, they mistook it for a job. That night, I opened the family group chat again. Above my message were all the usual requests. "Callan, do you still have that contractor's number? Can you look at Bria's laptop this weekend? Do you know where Mom kept the insurance papers?" Then my message. "I need someone there tomorrow." Nothing under it. I typed, "Never mind." Then I deleted it. Instead, I took a screenshot and saved it in my timeline. That felt cold for a second. Then, it felt honest. The night before court, I could not stay in the apartment. The settlement was on the table, and I was close to signing it just to make everything stop. So I drove to my mother's old house in a quiet Atlanta neighborhood where the porches were narrow and everybody's mailbox leaned a little. The kitchen light still worked. I switched it on and stood there with my coat still buttoned. The place smelled like dust, lemon cleaner, and paper. I was not looking for evidence. I was looking for something steadier than my own head. In a cardboard box near the pantry, I found her pale blue notebook. Mom wrote everything down: medicine times, bills, who came by, who called, who promised next week. Callan came today. Callan stayed until I slept. Rulon called, said next week. Sayla sent flowers. There was no anger in her notes. That made them worse. My mother never accused anybody. She just told the truth. Near the back, I found a line written in her careful hand. Don't argue with people who profit from misunderstanding you. Write it down. Tucked into the spine was the blue pen. Same cracked cap. Same cheap plastic barrel. I sat at her table and read that sentence until the words stopped shaking inside me. My mother had been gone for a year, but that night she was still the only person in my family telling me not to disappear. I put the notebook into my briefcase beside the retainer emails, the bank notices, and the settlement Arden wanted me to sign. Back at my apartment, I started the timeline again. Dates, times, exact phrases. Facts first, feelings later, if there was room. At the top of a fresh legal pad page, I wrote one sentence: make the record hold what they want erased. Then, I opened the settlement again. This time, I read it slowly, the way Mom used to read prescription labels. Not trusting the big print, not skipping the small print. On page 17, in a paragraph that should not have needed to exist, I saw a name: Silverpine. I almost signed myself out of my own life, but my mother's notebook made me read page 17 one more time, and that was where I found the name Arden swore was only in my head. The word Silverpine sat in the smallest print on page 17, quiet as a locked door, and twice as dangerous. At first, I thought my eyes had slipped. I had been reading legal language for hours, and after a while, every paragraph starts sounding like it was built to make ordinary people give up. But I read the sentence again, then, once more. It said I could not reference, disclose, allege, pursue, or assert any claim involving Silverpine, associated holding vehicles, restricted instruments, or beneficial structures connected to Arden's separate estate. A contract does not forbid a ghost by name. I copied the whole paragraph by hand, not because I understood every term yet. I didn't. But I understood fear when I saw it dressed as paperwork. My mother's blue pen rested between my fingers. I circled Silverpine once. The ink came out pale on the first curve, then caught and turned dark. That pen had written down my mother's medicine schedule. That night, it circled $54 million. I pressed the cracked cap closed and heard the little click. Arden's settlement offer sat beside it. $350,000. Called generous transition support. That was the phrase Bram Calder used. Transition. Like I was a tenant being moved out of a furnished room. But below the money were the real teeth. A non-disclosure agreement. A waiver of future discovery. Language saying I had no claim to anything connected to Vale Meridian Logistics beyond limited spousal support. That settlement was not asking me to start over. It was asking me to help them erase where I had been. So I made copies. One for the folder. One hidden in a separate envelope. I scanned page 17 at a public machine because my own printer had become unreliable after the accounts were frozen. I wrote the date, the time, and the exact words in my timeline. Then I checked what I already had legal access to: old tax folders, household backups, calendar exports from devices Arden and I both used when we still lived under the same roof. I did not break into her company. I did not guess passwords. I looked through the shared records of a marriage she had not bothered to separate cleanly because convenience had always mattered more to her than caution. There were traces. Nothing complete. A calendar note with SP Review, a partial attachment name, one reference to beneficial review. Small things, but small things are how large lies begin to show their edges. A week later, in court, Bram made sure Silverpine arrived before I could explain it. After Merrick's little performance and the judge's warning about representing myself, Bram stood with a folder in his hand and a voice so gentle it almost sounded kind. "Your Honor, we have concerns about Mr. Voss's ability to distinguish ordinary financial documents from imagined patterns." That was when he introduced Dr. Audra Klein's affidavit. I knew Dr. Klein. I had gone to her after my mother died, when sleep became something I watched other people do. I went because grief had started changing the shape of my days, and I did not want to become a stranger to myself. Bram read from the affidavit. Fixed, delusional beliefs involving a fabricated multi-million-dollar trust. For a second, the room lost its edges. They had named my evidence inside the diagnosis before I ever opened my mouth. Arden lowered her gaze. Her hand moved toward a tissue, but she did not use it. That was Arden at her best. Never too much, just enough pain to look credible. "I tried to keep this private," she said softly. "I didn't want him embarrassed. But his fixation has become frightening." Her voice was warm on the surface, stainless steel underneath. I wanted to stand up and tell the judge grief was not insanity. I wanted to say, asking for help should not become proof that you do not deserve to be heard. I wanted to say Arden had read my weakest season and turned it into a court strategy. But Merrick was watching me. Bram was waiting for me. Arden was inviting me to prove her point. So I stayed seated. Under the table, my fingers closed around the blue pen. That was when I saw the full shape of it. If I said nothing about Silverpine, Arden won. If I said the name, Bram would point to the affidavit. If I brought documents, they would call the documents part of the delusion. If I got upset, they would call me unstable. If I stayed calm, they would call it a performance. My mother's line came back to me. "Don't argue with people who profit from misunderstanding you. Write it down." I opened my legal pad and wrote one word: timing. Judge Pike looked down from the bench. "Mr. Voss, do you understand the seriousness of challenging a sworn psychiatric affidavit while representing yourself?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said. Bram looked satisfied. Arden's mouth softened into that almost smile she used when she believed the room belonged to her. Merrick leaned back like the door had finally locked. But in my folder, page 17 waited. Silverpine sat inside a circle of blue ink. They had built a diagnosis around the truth, so when I finally stood up, I knew I could not sound wounded. I had to sound exact. I stood with page 17 in my hand, not to plead with the court, and not to defend my sanity like a man begging strangers to approve his own mind. I stood because Arden had left one seam in the wall. Bram expected me to say, "I'm not crazy." Arden expected pain. Merrick wanted anger. I could feel him waiting for it, sitting there with that polished smile, ready to watch me hand them exactly what they needed. I looked at Judge Pike. "Your Honor, I have one question before this court decides my evidence is a symptom." The judge's eyes narrowed. "What question, Mr. Voss?" I read the settlement clause as plainly as I could. No raised voice, no speeches. I said the word Silverpine clearly, then held up the page. If Silverpine doesn't exist, why did her lawyer ask me to never say its name? The room changed. Not loudly. It was smaller than that. Arden's expression stayed almost perfect, but her smile stopped moving. Merrick shifted in his chair. Bram stood too fast, and that was how I knew the question had landed. Harlan Creed took the page from me. The blue circle around Silverpine was visible against the white paper as he carried it to the bench. "I'm not asking the court to decide the entire issue right now," I said. "I'm asking the court not to accept a psychiatric label before reviewing the financial inconsistency that label was designed to bury." I handed over one more page. Not a stack, just a clean wire transfer summary, with a date, routing information, and a reference that matched the settlement language too closely to ignore. Judge Pike studied both pages. Bram stepped in quickly. "Your Honor, settlement language is often broad. Mr. Voss is mischaracterizing standard protective provisions. He lacks the financial background to interpret restricted instruments or beneficial structures." That was not entirely true. Before Arden started calling me unstable, I had built operational systems for Vale Meridian that half her executives did not understand. But I did not say that yet. Timing mattered. I glanced once at Arden. Her fingers had tightened around the edge of her binder. One thumbnail pressed into the leather so hard it left a crescent mark. Merrick leaned toward her and whispered something. Bram shot him a look sharp enough to cut the whisper in half. I wanted to smile. I did not. A man accused of instability cannot afford the luxury of looking pleased. Then Bram changed the battlefield. "Your Honor," he said, "this is precisely the danger Dr. Klein identified. A delusional belief system can organize itself around fragments of real language. The more documents Mr. Voss produces, the more elaborate the delusion becomes." There it was. No proof meant I was lying. Too much proof meant I was sick. Arden lowered her eyes again, performing that careful sadness. Merrick murmured, "You should have taken the money." Judge Pike turned toward him. "Mr. Shaw, one more comment, and you will wait outside." Merrick sat back. But the sentence had already done its work. The judge called a short recess. I gathered my folder and walked into the restroom down the hall. The fluorescent light made my face look older than 39. My collar felt tight. I turned on the faucet and let the water run over my hands. For one ugly moment, I wondered if stopping would be easier. Then my phone lit up. Selah, please don't drag us into this. Mom wouldn't want this. That message hurt more than Merrick's insult. My sister had used my mother's name to ask for silence. My mother's handwriting was asking for the truth. I typed, "I'm done." I stared at it. Then I erased it. Back in the courtroom, I sat at my table and opened the legal pad. With Mom's blue pen, I wrote one sentence. They will call proof a symptom. The word proof came out darker than the rest. I wrote it because I needed to see the trap outside my own head. If I did not name it, I was afraid I might start believing it. Page 17 had opened the door, but it would not be enough. Bram would keep saying I misunderstood. Arden would keep looking wounded. Merrick would keep laughing from the side until someone made him stop. I needed more than evidence. I needed source, access, dates, a clean path, a record they could not wave away by pointing at a diagnosis. When the recess ended, I looked into my briefcase at the next folder. Home server, sync logs, folder paths, the system Arden had used for convenience. If they were going to call my proof a symptom, then I had to show the court where every piece of proof had been born. The next morning, I walked back into that courtroom with folder paths, sync dates, and the one thing Arden never thought I understood better than her lawyers, the system she had used for convenience. I wore the same suit, same old briefcase, same blue pen clipped to my legal pad. I did not look richer, stronger, or more impressive than I had the day before, but the room was quieter when I came in. That mattered. Bram Calder stood almost as soon as court resumed. Your Honor, before Mr. Voss continues with these alleged financial claims, we have serious concerns regarding improper access to proprietary corporate material. He did not say hacking like an insult. He said it like a man placing a clean white cloth over a dirty blade. He continued, self-represented parties often misunderstand the distinction between marital access and corporate systems. We believe Mr. Voss may have obtained these materials unlawfully or through obsessive monitoring. Arden lowered her eyes, as if frightened by what I might have done. Merrick watched me with a faint smile, waiting for me to defend myself the wrong way. I did not. They had called the evidence a symptom. Now they were trying to call the path to it a crime. Judge Pike turned to me. Mr. Voss, if you cannot establish lawful access, this court may not consider the material. Yes, Your Honor, I said. May I lay foundation? He gave a short nod. I opened the folder marked Home Server. I was not a lawyer, I said. But before Miss Vale called me unstable, I helped build and maintain several internal routing and backup systems Vale Meridian used during its growth period. Systems are something I understand. Bram shifted slightly. I kept my voice plain. Years ago, when we were still living together, Miss Vale wanted one shared home backup system. Photos, household records, calendar exports, tablet syncs, old attachments. It was installed in the basement of our marital home, paid for from joint funds. I placed the first page on the document camera. Family archive. Old tablet sync. Calendar attachments. The files I reviewed were already synced to that household server before separation. I did not enter a corporate network. I did not bypass a password. I did not crack anything. These were stored in our home. The date appeared on the screen, months before the separation. Judge Pike leaned forward. Who installed the system? I did. Was it in the marital home? Yes. Did Miss Vale use it? For years. Was this file synced before separation? Yes, Your Honor. Bram objected when I started to explain the Silverpine references, and Judge Pike stopped me there. Fair enough. He was not handing me the whole road, but he was no longer letting them close it. Then Arden spoke before Bram could stop her. That was never meant for him. The room went still. Bram turned toward her fast. Merrick's smile disappeared. Judge Pike looked over his glasses at Arden. She had not said it was fake. She had said it was not meant for me. I did not pounce on it. I just stood there and let her sentence breathe. She called it hacking because she forgot she stored the lie in our house. Judge Pike made a note. Proceed carefully, Mr. Voss. I reached into my briefcase then and took out the small storage device. It looked plain in my palm. Too plain for what it carried. Bram stood again. Your Honor, we object to any audio evidence. It may be edited, fabricated, taken out of context, or highly prejudicial. I'm not asking the court to trust me, I said. I'm asking the court to preserve the original before they tell you it doesn't exist. I looked at the clerk. That's why I brought the device, not a copy. Mabel Hurst received it from Harlan Creed. She logged it, sealed it, and placed it inside a clear evidence bag. That small plastic bag changed the room. Until then, everything had been something they could call a misunderstanding, a fixation, a poor man reaching. But now, the truth was no longer only in my memory. It had a label, a time, a clerk, and a chain of custody. I had listened to that recording alone in my car 3 times. Each time, I turned it off before the end because Arden's voice still knew where to hurt me. If I played it too soon, Bram would call it revenge. If I waited too long, the truth could vanish under more filings. So I chose procedure. Procedure was not warm. It did not comfort anybody. But in that room, it was stronger than outrage. Arden sat perfectly still, but her throat moved once. Bram leaned close and whispered something to her. Merrick was no longer entertained. Judge Pike said, "The court will determine admissibility later. The original will be preserved." I sat down and looked at my legal pad. They will call proof a symptom. The words were still there in blue ink, but now the proof had a source, a path, a date, and a sealed device. The next time Bram Calder called my evidence a delusion, Judge Pike did something Arden had not planned for. He told the clerk to play the recording. Static came through the courtroom speakers first. Not loud, just a thin crackle, like an old radio finding a station. Then Arden's real voice entered the room. Without perfume, without courtroom softness, without that polished sadness she wore in front of judges and donors. I did not look at her. I looked at Judge Pike. I had thought hearing that recording in court would make me feel strong. I was wrong. It pulled me right back to our kitchen. I could almost see the white tile, the refrigerator light, the glass of water I had not touched because my hands had been too unsteady that night. Then Arden's voice filled the room. I don't need him locked in a hospital. I just need him locked out of credibility. No one moved. Merrick's voice came next, lower than hers. And if he finds Silver Pine? Arden answered like she was discussing a calendar problem. Then Dr. Klein makes sure every figure he says sounds insane. The court reporter's hands paused above the keys. The air in that room changed. Then came the line I had hated hearing, even when I was alone in my car. Poor men don't need to lose in court. They just need to look unstable long enough to be ignored. The recording ended with a small click. Silence sat there after it. Not the quiet from before, when people were waiting to laugh or object. This was different. This was the sound of a room realizing the woman who had performed concern had been caught planning erasure. Merrick's smirk was gone. Arden stared down at the table. Bram Calder stood almost immediately. Your Honor, this recording has not been fully authenticated. It may lack context. Audio can be edited. It can mislead. It should not be given improper weight at this stage. Judge Pike's voice was colder than it had been all morning. Mr. Calder, the original device was preserved through the clerk. You may file any proper authentication motion. But your client placed Mr. Voss's credibility and psychiatric condition directly at issue. Evidence concerning possible manipulation of that credibility is relevant. Bram's face tightened. For the first time, he looked less like a man steering the room and more like a man making sure he was not standing too close to the wreck. I rose slowly. Your Honor, I'd like to address Dr. Klein's affidavit. Judge Pike gave a short nod. Limited questioning. Dr. Audra Klein sat near the side, composed in the way professionals learn to be composed. She was in her late 50s, silver hair tucked neatly behind one ear, glasses low on her nose. But after that recording, her name did not sound like expert testimony anymore. It sounded like a signature waiting to be explained. I did not attack her. That would have helped them. Dr. Klein, I said, how many times did you meet with me after my mother died? She adjusted her glasses. 3 sessions. How long was each session? Approximately 50 minutes. Did you conduct a full forensic evaluation for this divorce case? No. Did you review my full medical history before signing the affidavit? Her answer came slower. Not the full history. I placed the next document on the camera. This is a grant record from Vail Meridian Wellness Foundation. $220,000 approved to your clinic for behavioral health research. Was that approved before or after the language in your affidavit changed? Bram objected, but Judge Pike allowed the question. Dr. Klein looked toward Arden, then back down. The grant was for research support. Who controlled that foundation? She touched the edge of her glasses again. Miss Vail had final approval authority. The money had not arrived in an envelope. It had arrived dressed as philanthropy. Then I showed the draft. On the screen were 2 lines. Original: acute grief response and sleep deprivation. Changed: fixed delusional ideation and impaired reality testing. The word grief had disappeared without making a sound. I felt my mother's notebook in my briefcase, as if the paper itself had weight. I had gone to therapy because I could not sleep after losing her. I had gone because I wanted to stay whole. Arden had taken that and turned it into a warning label. They did not cure anything. They edited my pain until it looked like madness. Judge Pike leaned forward. Doctor, who suggested that language? Dr. Klein did not answer right away. That pause did more than any speech I could have made. Arden tried to speak. Your Honor, this is being taken completely out of context. Judge Pike turned to her. Miss Vail, you will not speak unless addressed. The room that had laughed when I walked in was not laughing anymore. I looked down at my legal pad. The blue ink was still there. They will call proof a symptom. For the first time, the proof had answered back. I thought the recording had broken their story. Then Bram leaned toward Arden, whispered fast, and stood again. Your Honor, before this goes further, we have new evidence regarding Mr. Voss's conduct toward Mr. Shaw. Merrick sat up straighter. And just like that, I understood. They were done hiding the money for the moment. Now they were trying to make me look dangerous enough for the court to stop listening. Bram Calder called it an incident report. I knew what it was the moment Merrick sat up straighter. It was a clipped sentence, dressed up as fear. Your Honor, Bram said, before this court gives further weight to Mr. Voss's accusations, we must address recent threatening conduct toward Mr. Shaw. He played a short clip. My own voice came through the speaker. You have no idea what I still have. That was all. Bram let the silence work for him. This is not a man preserving evidence. This is a man escalating. He is using this courtroom as a stage. Merrick looked down like a worried citizen. Arden kept her eyes lowered. They were trying to rebuild the old picture. Poor husband. Unstable. Angry. Dangerous. I did not turn toward Merrick. I did not raise my voice. Your Honor, I said, play the whole call. Bram objected. I kept my eyes on the bench. If context matters when they accuse me, it should matter when I defend myself. Judge Pike allowed it. The full recording started with Merrick's voice. Take the money, Callan. No judge is going to believe a man with your file. Then my voice. You have no idea what I still have. Merrick again. What? More stories? And then me. Documents. Dates. The things people forget when they think nobody is writing them down. The clip they had brought into court fell apart in less than a minute. If I meant violence, I said, I wouldn't have brought documents. I brought dates. Merrick's face changed. Not much, just enough. So I moved to the next page. It was a consulting agreement between one of Arden's holding structures and Merrick's advisory firm. I placed it on the document camera. Mr. Shaw's agreement includes a $1.8 million performance bonus, I said, tied to resolving my discovery claims or limiting my competency to pursue them. Then I showed the email. Don't fight him on the figures. Make the court doubt the man holding them. The words sat on the screen like they had been waiting for air. I looked at Merrick. You said I lost the moment I walked in. Was that before or after you billed my wife for making sure I'd be called insane? He opened his mouth, then closed it. That should have felt good. It did not last, because the next document was family. A concern letter, signed by Rulon and Selah, my brother and sister. It said I had always struggled to accept reality when things did not go my way. They were sitting behind me now. In Chapter 1, those seats had been empty. Filled. They hurt worse. "Rulon," I said, without turning fully around, "did Arden's foundation assist with your mortgage refinance after you signed this letter?" His answer came low. "Yes." "Selah," I said, "was Bria's tuition covered the week after your signature?" A thin sound left her before the word did. "Yes." I kept my voice even because if I let it break, they would make that the story. I was the youngest. I was used to carrying things. I just didn't know my name was one of them. Bram objected that the family details were prejudicial. Judge Pike allowed limited inquiry because the letter had been offered to damage my credibility. While Bram argued, I noticed Tavia Sloan near the back row, Arden's assistant. She had her phone in her lap, and the color had gone from her face. I had seen that look before. It was the look of someone trying to obey a powerful person fast enough not to be blamed. That was when I knew something was happening outside the courtroom. I asked to submit one more item from the preserved data stream tied to the shared system. Bram objected before I finished the sentence. "This is not a fishing expedition," I said. "It concerns active asset movement." The first item looked harmless. Executive Strategy Retreat, Miami. The next was not harmless. A passport scan uploaded to a charter service, with onward travel noted. Then came the instruction to Corbin Rusk. Move Silverpine sub-account B before close of business. The timestamp was during court recess. Arden's head lifted. That is normal continuity planning. He doesn't understand corporate operations. He's reading everything through paranoia. I placed the transfer instruction beside the calendar entry. She snapped before Bram could stop her. "You don't even know which sub-account." Then she stopped. But the half she said was enough. Judge Pike looked at her for a long moment. Bram shut his eyes briefly, like he knew the damage could not be brought back. The judge looked over the bench at all of us. "We now have an undisclosed trust name in settlement language, a psychiatric affidavit tied to foundation funding, a recording concerning credibility manipulation, a paid consultant with a success fee, a family concern letter connected to financial assistance, a clipped audio report, and active transfer instructions." No one spoke. This hearing is no longer limited to ordinary marital property division. Bram asked for a recess to evaluate exposure. Arden stared forward, no longer smiling. Merrick would not look at her. Rulon and Selah sat behind me, and their presence felt like weight on my shoulders instead of support. Judge Pike reached for the order sheet. I looked down at my mother's blue pen. It had marked Silverpine. It had named the trap. Now it sat beside the evidence that stopped Arden's escape. When Judge Pike reached for the order sheet, no one in that courtroom was laughing anymore, but I still did not feel like a man who had won. Justice did not arrive like thunder. It arrived as paper, ink, and Judge Pike's voice telling Arden Vale she no longer controlled what happened next. He sat forward at the bench, order sheet in front of him, while the courtroom stayed still around us. This was not the shocked quiet after the recording. This was different. This was the sound of people realizing the story had moved from accusation to consequence. I stood at my table in the same worn suit, still without counsel, still with my old briefcase beside my chair. Only now, nobody looked at me like a punchline. Judge Pike began issuing orders. All records tied to Silverpine were to be preserved. Associated holding vehicles, subaccounts, trustee communications, settlement negotiations, foundation payments, any communications involving Arden, Merrick Shaw, Dr. Audra Klein, Tavia Sloan, and Corbin Rusk were to be retained pending review. He ordered a temporary restriction on asset transfers connected to Silverpine until a forensic accounting could be completed. He referred the materials involving Dr. Klein's affidavit, the foundation grant, and the edited language for review by the appropriate medical oversight authority. Then he looked directly at Arden. This court will not allow a psychiatric label to be used as a lockbox for undisclosed assets. No one had to explain what that meant. Arden was not going to jail that afternoon. Real life is not that clean. But she had lost the thing she valued most in that room: control. Bram was no longer attacking me. He was asking about deadlines, scope, preservation requirements. His voice had become careful in a new way. like every sentence needed an escape route. Merrick kept his hands folded and his eyes away from Arden. The man who had smirked when I walked in now looked like he was measuring how far his own signature might reach. Dr. Klein sat pale and still. Her affidavit was no longer a professional opinion. It was a document with a money trail behind it. Arden did not scream. She went quiet. That was worse, somehow. She looked like a woman hearing a door lock from the wrong side. When court paused, I felt movement behind me. Rulon and Silo were still there. Their presence felt heavier than their absence had. Rulon's face was red. Sella's eyes were wet. I knew they might have been sorry. I also knew sorry did not erase a letter used to help call me unstable. I did not turn right away. That mattered. All my life, when family called, I turned. To fix, to explain, to carry. This time, I let them sit with their own silence instead of carrying it out of the room for them. When the session ended, I gathered my legal pad, page 17, the old briefcase, and my mother's blue pen. Harlan Creed gave me a small nod. Nothing dramatic, just human. I walked out through the same hallway where I had felt so small that morning. No one laughed. That absence had weight. Outside, the rain had stopped. The courthouse steps were slick, and the gray sky was starting to clear over downtown Atlanta. People moved around me, shoes tapping, phones buzzing. Lives continuing like mine had not just been pulled back from the edge of somebody else's lie. I reached my car and sat behind the wheel without starting it. The briefcase rested on the passenger seat. My phone lit up. Rulon. A few seconds later, Selah texted, "Can we talk?" I looked at the screen for a long moment. Before all this, I would have answered. I would have softened my voice. I would have helped them feel less guilty. I would have found some way to make my pain easier for them to stand near. Not that day. I did not ignore the call because I hated him. I ignored it because, for once, my peace did not have to be useful to anyone else. I opened the briefcase and took out my mother's pale blue notebook. The pen was clipped inside, cracked cap and all. I turned to the page I had read the night I almost signed everything away. Don't argue with people who profit from misunderstanding you. Write it down. Back then, that line had kept me from disappearing. Now it told me I had done what she taught me. I took the pen. My hand did not shake the way it had in the courtroom. Under her sentence, I wrote 2 words. I did. The pen skipped on the first letter. Then, the ink held. The court order did not heal everything. It did not give me my marriage back, and I did not want it to. It did not make my sibling's letter disappear. It did not erase the fact that my grief had been edited into delusion, but it stopped the lie from becoming the official version of my life. I did not walk out happy. I walked out intact. If you have ever had to keep receipts, screenshots, dates, or recordings just to prove you were not making things up, I believe you. Silence is not weakness when it is gathering truth, but silence becomes a prison when it protects the people hurting you. They called me insane because my truth was expensive. But for the first time in my life, I did not need my wife, my family, or a courtroom full of strangers to tell me I was sane.